We're very excited to be co-hosting this event on the future of AI in healthcare today. Really, we've got such an incredible lineup of speakers and panelists, and they're all going to explore and debate how AI is bringing, I suppose, a paradigm shift in healthcare for not only clinicians, but researchers and patients themselves.
Excellent. So look, I'll just run very quickly through the format, and then I'll hand over to Patricia to introduce our first speaker. So just to explain to you what's going to happen this morning, we're going to move along quite a clip because we're hoping to stay to about an hour for the session. We have three very eminent speakers that I'll ask Patricia to introduce, and then following the speakers, we'll have a panel discussion, and again, a very interesting panel with some super questions that we've prepared for that panel, and Patricia will moderate that panel. So look, without further ado, Patricia, if I hand it over to you and you can introduce our first speaker.
Thanks so much, Jorgen. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, and that's Peter Keeling. So Peter is founder and CEO of Diaceutics PLC, and that's a Belfast-based data company helping people access life-saving precision medicine through better diagnostic testing. And Peter has taken Diaceutics from startup to successful IPO in 2019. Peter recognized very early on that precision medicine would be an increasingly large part of the drug development paradigm, and it represents the shift in how the pharmaceutical industry operates. Peter's presentation today is entitled 15 Years, 300 Million Patients in 10 Minutes. Peter, the Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Hopefully you can all hear me. My thanks to the Institute and to the team at UCD for the invitation to speak today. Indeed, the challenge was kind of tell your life story in 10 minutes, so I thought that befitted the title. I'm not going to spend too much time focused on the Diaceutics story, really just one slide, because I do actually want to dive into some ways in which we are extracting and managing the data, which is obviously a key topic for today. Nonetheless, it would be remiss of me if I didn't try and describe a little bit of what we do. Our primary role in Diaceutics is to help both the pharmaceutical and the laboratory industries really integrate these brand new diagnostics that are being built and designed to support precision medicine. And these precision medicines, new smart drugs, where there is a dependency on the way that patients need to get tested. And it's that testing journey, and I'll come onto that more in a second, which we at Diaceutics have focused on to make sure that we are getting those testing hurdles out of the way to get these patients onto the right drug at the right time. I'm often asked to tell the story about how Diaceutics was founded, and we would need all of the full hour to tell that. But safe to say that I do anecdotally describe that I did give a presentation to a room at a meeting in Orlando, a pharmaceutical meeting in Orlando way back in 2005. Now in Orlando, you're always competing with SeaWorld and Disneyland. And when I was given the last slot on the last day, I was optimistic that I had 50 people in the room when I was presenting. And I was hypothesizing how important diagnostics was to the pharmaceutical industry. Nonetheless, I was dismayed when almost 43 of those people exited in the room over the next 45 minutes. But as all good entrepreneurs, you stand and hold on to that bastion till the very end. And indeed, there were two people who arrived up at the podium at the very end when I had to thank them all personally for staying in the room. One was from AstraZeneca, one was from GlaxoSmithKline, and they said, "This is interesting, come and work with us." And that really gave birth to a company that is today 150 people strong. We're operating in 17 different countries. And we've really spent the last 15 years trying to understand how to integrate diagnostics into these patient pathways in a better format. And to do that in conjunction with some of the leading pharmaceutical companies on the globe, all of whom are investing heavily in precision medicine. We have worked on almost all the cancer brands that have been launched, where there is a test interdependency over that time frame. And we built up a data lake or a data repository, well over 300 million patients, and I'll come on to that in a second.
Peter,
let me move on to.
Apologies, Peter. It's Patricia here. We've just had some requests from the audience to, if you could put your slides on full screen. If you can't, that's not an issue. But I'm just sorry to interrupt. But just some requests. Thank you so much.
Oh, I actually thought they were on full screen, because I'm sharing full screen this side. And maybe it's the fact that the just maybe stop share for 1 second. And I
not to worry if you can't fix it, but it's just I thought it would be best to apparently apologies for interrupting.
Okay, is that better?
That's perfect.
Yes,
Thank you.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, my apologies to those watching. So the data repository, and those of you who have worked in the kind of the collection of data, or the collation of data, will recognize that there are extraordinary difficulties in extracting healthcare data, because you have to reach out to multiple sources, and indeed Diaceutics is no different. We use what we call real-world data from the laboratories, and that's both in the United States and 17 other different countries. We use claims data, and so insurance data, both government insurance and private insurance. Prescription data obviously has relevance in terms of patient outcomes. And we actually do a lot of work in building demographics of how the laboratory community is serving cancer. So I can tell you, for example, that across the leading pharmaceutical markets, there are approximately 4,000 laboratories who are handling about 60% of all cancer testing. We know who those laboratories are, we know what they're doing, and we've been building with those relationships for the last 10 years. And I think one of my first messages is that if you want to build a real world view, as opposed to a view in a clinical trial, you have to use the multiple sources, and you have to try and weave these multiple sources together. And that is a significant endeavor to try and make these databases speak to each other. And indeed, we have a team here at Diaceutics that is dedicated to just that very task. In terms of kind of giving a picture of what are we using the data for, I have a couple of slides to describe this. We talk a lot about patient journeys in Diaceutics. And one of the things of a patient journey is, where they started all the way through to their treatment and, their wellness. We really laser focus on the diagnostic journey, because in the diagnostic journey, we see significant hurdles. In lung cancer, for example, a diagnostic journey for a patient going from cough to a cancer medication, precision medicine, could be anything up to 4.5 years. And there are 10 different testing events along that journey. So it's really critical for, I think, all of us in healthcare to laser focus on those diagnostic journeys and ask the question, how and where can we improve them? And you'll see here in a rather stylized slide that we really do map out these patient journeys all the way through, from the sample collection to the various laboratories, to the various subsequent first, second, and third line diagnostics that they get. And often this is a loop. In fact, when you really kind of look at the science behind what that stylized map is, you have a series of algorithms that are being built in the background to really determine how these connections are being made. And it is that data science, again, all of you will recognize the importance of that data science, is the data itself is useless. It's how you put that together and how you validate that in the real world to make sure that it is indeed representative of what's happening in the clinic today. Remembering, we're not trying to evidence what's going on in a clinical trial. We're trying to illustrate what's happening in everyday cancer care and indeed in other diseases like Alzheimer's and cardiovascular medicine. So we do indeed build these algorithms. We validate those algorithms back with our laboratories and with our clinical opinion leaders to make sure that we are fully representing this. And of course, along the way, we are indeed using machine learning, building out synthetic records. It may dismay many of you listening this morning to recognize that in the United States, for example, over 50% of the patients who go on to get a lung cancer treatment have not actually been formally diagnosed with lung cancer. These are omissions in their patient record, and something that you have to go back and both validate and replicate. So there's lots of struggles across across these databases. Nonetheless, part of it is to build these longitudinal pictures to give us all, both ourselves, our laboratory stakeholders, and our pharmaceutical clients, a much better understanding of where one introduces these significant diagnostics. And so what do we use these data for? Again, we could spend hours on this. I've just pulled out 2 or 3 insights here. We very much are able to identify what exactly are the labs performing. For example, one of the most well-known cancer biomarkers at the minute is a biomarker called PD-L1. There are 6 different pharmaceutical companies, well over 7 different diagnostic variations, all of which are embedded in different labels at the FDA. So there is a mesmeric quantum of understanding of what exactly going on at that lab level. And we track this and look at what lab is running what test. We're also able to look at the physician level and say, what tests are they ordering? Physicians have different testing behaviors. It's sort of logical, but understanding what those testing behaviors are and how we educate to change them is a really important part of this diagnostic journey. And last here is, where are these patients tested? Not all patients are tested alike, sadly. In fact, only 8% of patients in the United States and indeed in other markets are tested in the way that the guidelines suggest. The rest are all, as they would describe, on the bus, jumping on and off at various points in that journey. One thing I did want to do just before I kind of close out is really to say that when you zoom out from this data, and we've been living with it for well over a decade now, you realize that there are some kind of myths and realities in the background, and I just wanted to share some of those, perhaps as a thought experiment for the panel later on. And the first myth that I think pervades the diagnostic pathway is that diagnostics are less valuable than treatment. And I put that as a myth to say that I think our data illustrates that I think diagnostics are either equal to or greater than the value of treatment, i.e. if you can improve the way a patient's diagnostic health in cancer and other diseases is managed, you will have a greater or equal impact to that of a new treatment. Together, they are transformative. So part of what we're trying to do here is to focus and refocus eyes back on a neglected and forgotten diagnostic journey to make sure that we can unlock some of that clinical benefit. The second, and I think it is a truth, the technology is here. Yes, the data is messy. Yes, it's difficult to extract. Yes, it's hard to analyze. But these are challenges which are being surmounted as we speak. And I'm very optimistic that the type of technologies and data flows that we're starting to get are giving us the insights that we need to take action. And lastly, this is one I hear a lot, particularly in the clinical community: patients cannot handle the diagnostic information. Do not tell a patient what their diagnostic status is because we can't treat it. I think that's pejorative and parental, and I believe it absolutely gets in the way of us locking the promise of patients. Patients need this information managed, certainly collated in the right way and communicated, but nonetheless, the citizens of the world need to take hold of their diagnostic health if we are to change this and transform precision medicine. And my last slide, just because COVID is always on everyone's lips at the minute, and I'm going to describe this as COVID's third wave, not to dismay you on the call today, but as everybody is focused on COVID testing, what we have done at Diaceutics is to focus on COVID's impact on cancer testing. And what you see here in this rather complex slide is that in March and June of this year, cancer testing rates dropped significantly in all of the key markets, from China to the United States. And we see a drop roughly of about 30% of cancer testing. Now, those patients didn't go away. They didn't stop being sick. And they are and will start to present back into a healthcare system which is already challenged with being COVID distracted. Many of the labs, whilst they don't necessarily, those cancer labs don't necessarily run COVID tests, they are of course doing, they are of course sharing resources. And what we are able to do with our data is to predict that there is indeed going to be a significant system challenge in all of the countries that we dwell in, in the next 6 to 9 months as these cancer patients we present into a laboratory bandwidth which is already challenged. And what we're trying to do at the minute is to highlight that issue, use our data, use our real world evidence to say we have to start thinking about this as a consequence, a sequelae, if you like, of COVID. And with that, I'll pass back to Patricia. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's a brilliant talk, very much appreciated, I think, by our audience. And I wish you every success in the future with your business. Hugely interesting, I'm sure, to our members in the Analytics Institute, as well as those of you who joined us through the Institute for Discovery. Super stuff, Peter. Thank you very much. I should have said at the outset of this morning's sessions, just like to give a disclaimer that none of our speakers are actually speaking on behalf of their organizations. That any views that they're sharing this morning or knowledge is their own views rather than necessarily from their organizations. Just an important point to raise. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, who is Dr. Paulina Szklanna, who's manager of the AI Healthcare Hub in UCD and a research fellow at the UCD Conway Institute. Paulina works with clinicians, scientists, and industry, helping them to harness the power of AI to build cloud-based risk stratification models for the disease diagnostics. Importantly, the focus is getting these algorithms out of the lab and into production. So Paulina is going to talk this morning, very interestingly, on AI and the fight against COVID-19. So over to you, Paulina.
Thank you very much, Lorcan, for this kind introduction. My name is Paulina and I'm the manager of UCD AI Healthcare Hub. I have completed my PhD, just to give you a bit of background about myself, I've completed my PhD in biochemistry, focusing on biomarker discovery, and I'm extremely passionate on the merging the basic laboratory and clinical science with powerful AI technologies. And today I want to tell you a bit about what the AI Healthcare Hub is, what it is that we do, and why do we do it. So AI Healthcare Hub is an interdisciplinary accelerator, which means that we are bringing interdisciplinary teams together to accelerate various projects. And we also democratize AI. So what do I mean by democratization of AI? Well, we are bringing the AI and making it accessible to a non-coding researchers and clinicians so that they can accelerate their research, make data-driven decisions, and deliver meaningful translation and outputs. And we do it basically to just help and solve difficult and impactful problems of real world. So the easiest way to explain this and demonstrate what we do is with an example. Therefore, I want to tell you about one of our projects incubated within the hub that surrounds COVID-19, coagulopathy and thrombosis, and how can that data be used to prognose and severity of COVID-19. So basically, one of the biggest problems in the fight against COVID-19 is the lack of predictability of how severe this disease is going to get. So when the patient presents to the hospital with COVID-19 symptoms, they're obviously going to get a COVID swab, but they're also getting a whole panel of blood tests done, and their vitals are being monitored. Once patient conditions deteriorates, an attending clinician will call upon a team council to decide whether the patient would require ICU care. This decision is actually very difficult to make, and it requires a lot of medical expertise. It also takes a lot of time and effort. But imagine if we were actually able to help clinicians with that decision, so that they would be able to know whether somebody would require ICU care within the first few hours of admission to the hospital. That would definitely give clinicians and the patients the gift of time to provide better outcomes. And this is actually one of our key objectives on this project. So working closely with the Mathur Hospital in Dublin, we have gathered the data for all severe COVID-19 patients that presented to the Mathur Hospital during the first wave of COVID-19 in Ireland. We have prepared this data and subjected it to our cloud-based platform. Platform for analysis, where we were able to identify 3 most important variables for the prediction, and utilizing those 3 variables, we have built a decision tree based algorithm for predicting severity of COVID-19 at the time of hospital admission. In fact, we achieved less than 4% of misclassification rate. But what does that mean? Well, that means that almost 97% of the time, we know how severe COVID-19 is going to get, which is an amazing achievement. And we are now working closely to get data from an all-Ireland database of COVID patients so that we can strengthen this algorithm and we can put it into production by Christmas so that it can make a real world difference. So with this algorithm, clinicians will no longer have to rely on monitoring the patient vitals constantly, but they'd be able to know within the first 2 hours of patient's admission to the hospital whether or not they would need an ICU care. And this is going to impact and deliver more positive outcomes for the patients, but it will also influence the cost and resource management within the hospital. Aside from the COVID work, within the AI Healthcare Hub, we're also incubating other projects, such as AI Premi, which is aiming at revolutionizing preeclampsia care by disrupting preeclampsia diagnostics. And with AI Premi, we are making novel tools to, first of all, aid preeclampsia diagnosis, but also aid prognosis of preeclampsia severity so that the delivery of the preterm baby can be planned for, so that ultimately we can save lives of babies and their mothers. Furthermore, in collaboration with UCD Physics, we are working on a risk stratification calculator for hamstring injury within athletes. And this project aims to predict the hamstring injury or when it will happen so that preventive steps can be taken, meaning that the athlete won't need to be out for the season. And finally, we also have a project surrounding multiple sclerosis within the hub, and this is called AI Predict MS. In this project, we are aiming to predict the disease course multiple sclerosis would take in each patient so that they can get more personalized treatment and physiotherapy plans. So just to summarize, UCD AI Healthcare Hub is an interdisciplinary accelerator. We are up and running, and we are very accessible through our cloud-based platform so that anyone and anywhere can engage with us. We also take, we also are able to take projects through an entire data analytics life cycle, and we are working on some incredibly interesting and impactful projects at the moment to put some exciting algorithms into production. I would like to thank all of our collaborators, without whom this would be a very, very difficult thing to achieve. And I would like to thank all of you for listening. And if you have any questions or if you wish to reach out to me, you can do so via email or Twitter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paulina. What a fantastic initiative. Brilliant stuff. Great. And I see you're supported by one of our member companies, SAS, who was an original founding organization of the Analytics Institute. So it's great to see them supporting such valuable work, and I'm delighted to see it in action. Well done. Great stuff. Our next speaker today is UCD alumnus Dr Pearse Keane, who is consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields Eye Hospital in London, and also an associate professor at the University College London Institute of Ophthalmology. In 2016, Pearse initiated a formal collaboration between Moorfields Eye Hospital and Google Deepmind, with the aim of developing artificial intelligence algorithms for the early detection and treatment of retinal disease. In May 2020, he jointly led work to develop an early warning system for age-related macular degeneration, by far the commonest cause of blindness in Ireland and in the UK. So Pearse this morning is going to talk about the Moorfields Deepmind collaboration using AI to reinvent the eye exam. Looking forward to this. Over to you, Pearse. Pearse, you need to unmute.
Sorry about that. I thought I had, but let's see.
Zoom has its own tricks it plays on.
Yeah.
Super. Right, if you just go full screen. Yep, perfect.
Well, first of all, I'd love to thank Patricia for inviting me to give this talk. And, I think as a graduate of UCD, it's very exciting for me to learn about the Institute for Discovery. And, what I've come to learn in my career is that really where the magic happens is at the boundaries between different disciplines and at the boundaries between academia and industry. And so, like I say, great to hear about the Discovery Institute. Even better to hear about the AI healthcare hub as well. So looking forward to working with you all in the future. But just to say, I think there's a lot of hype around artificial intelligence, but I think despite all the hype, there is the potential for it to transform healthcare. And one of the things that I believe is that ophthalmology is at the forefront of this and can be an exemplar for other medical specialties in the way that we approach it. And that's not just on the technical side, but also in terms of our approaches to ethics and data governance and patient and public involvement. Now, my background, Lorcan has already summarized it quite nicely, but I'm a consultant at Moorfields in London. I specialize in the treatment of retinal disease. I'm also an associate professor at UCL, where I've got a clinical AI research group, and I'm funded by UK Research and Innovation as a Future Leaders Fellow. And this is a new organization and a new funding scheme, and really it puts me in a privileged position because I can actually devote about 80% of my time to research. And that really has facilitated a lot of my work. The other thing that I should say is that given the subject matter of the next few minutes, I should disclose that I have acted as an external consultant for Deepmind. So I'm going to tell you in 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to tell you about 2 things that I'm super excited about. The first is the Moorfields Deepmind collaboration. Why do we need AI in technology? Is it just because there's hype around AI and it's a good way to get papers, or is there a real world problem that it needs to address? Well, this is a picture that I love to show to non-ophthalmologists, which basically refers to an article in 2017, or statistics from 2017 from NHS Digital, that showed that ophthalmology since 2017 has surpassed orthopedics in terms of being the busiest medical specialty in terms of clinic appointments on the NHS. In fact, nearly 10% of all clinic appointments in the NHS are for eyes, and that constitutes nearly 10 million appointments per year. And if you graph the change over the last few years, ophthalmology is like this, and orthopedics in second place is something like this. Now, the problem is that in some senses, we're drowning in the number of patients that we need to see. And this is a problem not just in the UK, but around the world. And earlier this year, pre-pandemic, seems like a different lifetime, but there was a lot of media attention in the UK because there was a tragic case in the south of England of a woman in her 30s who was pregnant and has glaucoma, and she needed to have glaucoma surgery done urgently to avoid blindness. But for whatever reason, there was delays in getting it done, and she lost her sight. And I cannot think of a more tragic kind of vignette of the challenges that our systems face. So what I believe is that new technologies and innovation, and in particular AI, and in particular deep learning, can, at least in part, begin to address some of these problems. Now, for that reason, in July 2016, I initiated a formal research collaboration between my hospital, Moorfields, and the artificial intelligence company, Deepmind. And Deepmind are a company that were formed in 2012. And part of the reason that I approached them was because two of the three co-founders are alumni of UCL, and two of the three co-founders are from London. And their headquarters are based in King's Cross, so just 2 stops away from Moorfields on the tube. So Deepmind were founded in 2012. They got a lot of media attention in 2014 when they were acquired by Google, reputedly for £400 million. And they are arguably one of the world's leading artificial intelligence companies. So we've been working with them since then. And essentially, we shared about 1.2 million anonymized OCT scans, retinal scans with them, and have worked closely together on this project since then. And the idea was that develop a deep learning system that could look at a retinal OCT scan and identify the most sight-threatening diseases to allow prioritization of those conditions. So after much work, we've published the first output from this collaboration in Nature Medicine in August and September 2018. You can see that this is a massive multidisciplinary effort. More than 30 different authors from UCL, from Moorfields, and from Deepmind. It was also very exciting because it was featured on the cover of Nature Medicine, which is quite a thrill. But also, given that this is AI, you cannot escape the hype around it, and so you saw these kind of headlines and global media attention. Now, you want to disseminate your research as much as possible, and this is a very exciting thing, but it's also a little bit awkward because the fact of the matter is we haven't saved the sight of millions of people yet. What we have done is published a proof of concept in a research journal. And now we're on, actually, what I'm coming to learn is the much more challenging part of the journey, which is seeing how you can implement that algorithm at scale. And I used to think that publishing the paper was the hard part, and my eyes have been opened in recent years to the reality. So just to show you the algorithm in action, this is a video of a patient in his 40s with diabetes. If you look at the bottom row, that's where the raw OCT volume scan is being fed in. And OCT is kind of like ultrasound, but it uses light waves instead of sound waves. It gives very high resolution images. This patient has poorly controlled diabetes, and so their retina is very edematous. It's waterlogged. And the top row shows the classification outputs of the deep learning networks. And so in this case, it recommends a semi-urgent referral and diagnoses macular retinal edema. So where we are with this, like I say, is about the implementation, something that I call going from code to clinic. And so one of the things I've had to learn is that the piece of experimental code that you use for a research paper is in no way suitable to be used at scale in the real world. And there's so many things that need to be done to make that happen. Now, in anticipation of that, we're thinking about new pathways of care, because having an AI algorithm in isolation is meaningless. It has to have, it's more about the end-to-end clinical pathway in which it can be slotted. And at Moorfields, we're building a new hospital in 2021 in the King's Cross area of London. And so we're already beginning to think about how we can have the flexibility in the pathways when we're ready to use these systems. The other thing that we're spending a lot of attention on is the increasing use of OCT in the community. If you go to many optometrists in Ireland and the UK and elsewhere, you can have an OCT scan done as part of your eye examination. And so really what we want to do is bring the AI into the community and potentially even into people's homes, as there are prototype home OCT devices under development, including with many Irish leaders in the field driving this change. So the last thing, in my last minute and a half or so, I just want to tell you about something else really cool that's not related to Google, but is building on what we've learned from the collaboration. And this is the idea, that, like a 100-year-old idea, that you can use the eye as the window to the rest of the body. And the exciting thing is we've known about this for a long time, but since about 2018, we've realized that with deep learning, you can now look at a retinal photograph like this, and you can say, this is a woman. You can say, she's 58 years old. She's a non-smoker. She's not diabetic. Her body mass index is around 25, and her blood pressure is 150/85, all from deep learning. And that's amazing. Now, if you're of a skeptical bent, you may say, well, okay, there are easier ways to tell if it's a man or a woman and what the age of the patient is and to measure the blood pressure than applying deep learning to a retinal photograph. But to me, it's exciting because human experts cannot, ophthalmologists cannot derive this information, but it suggests that maybe there's hidden gold in these scans. And if we have the right data sets, maybe we can find some interesting things. And so with that in mind, we have linked over 3 million OCT scans at Moorfields with something called the Hospital Episode Statistic Database in the UK. So we know everybody who's had an eye scan at Moorfields, whether they've gone on to have any sort of neurodegenerative or cardiovascular disease in an outpatient, inpatient, or A&E setting. And it took us 2.5 years to get the permissions to make this linkage. Now, we know, for example, that more than 12,000 patients who've had a retinal scan at Moorfields have gone on to develop a heart attack or gone on to develop dementia. And we have a range of other things, whether it's Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, or even rarer conditions. If you're interested in learning a bit more about that, it was featured in The Economist in December 2019. And the reason it was featured there even before we actually had any research papers to point to. And in fact, we still don't. The reason it was featured there was because the article was about our attention to detail in terms of the ethics and governance of making such a data linkage. So just to finish up in my last slides, I think that with AI, we have the potential to reinvent the eye examination for the 21st century. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about this, I was fortunate to write a short essay in The Lancet in December with one of my heroes, Dr. Eric Topol, about our kind of vision for the eye examination in the 21st century. And then lastly, look, where are the next steps? We need to move towards implementation. Research papers are all very good, but actually it has to work in the real world to really matter. I think that there's very exciting opportunities in AI-assisted scientific discovery. And something that I didn't talk about, but I was very excited to hear Paulina talk about, is that we're going to see a move towards democratization and industrialization of machine learning, deep learning, and AI in general in healthcare. And lastly, if anybody would like to get in touch, that's my email address. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pearse. Mind-blowing stuff that was. Well, great. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much. It was brilliant. We have a lot of questions coming in, but if you don't mind, I'm just going to keep on moving through the agenda as we have to be careful of time. If we have time at the end of the panel discussion, I'll put some of those questions back to you, but do appreciate it. Just incidentally, Deepmind are also speaking at our International Analytics and AI conference in November, which will be broadcast from the Convention Centre in Dublin. And what's interesting for me as a data person is, I think one of the things we're definitely learning is that COVID-19 is underlining the importance of data and patient data in places like the HSE, and they're putting huge effort into getting their data stuff together, which is a good thing, which at least something positive coming out of this awful situation we're all in at the moment. Thanks again, Pearse. I'm going to hand you over to Patricia now, who's going to lead us through the panel discussion. Thanks, Patricia.
Great, thanks so much, Lorcan. And I really would like to echo Lorcan's comments on our three speakers. Incredible work from very different aspects of artificial intelligence in healthcare. And I'd just like to a quick shout out to Pearse, because he mentioned his hero, Eric Topol. So Eric Topol is one of my heroes too, one of my longtime heroes. So that's great that we share a hero. And we actually had I had the pleasure of interviewing Eric a couple of months ago in this role. So fantastic, well done everybody. So now, in the interest of time, we have 20 minutes for a panel interview. So I'd really like to welcome our three panelists. So a very brief introduction to them all from me, and then I'll hand over to them. But our first panelist today is Professor Walter Kolch. So Walter is the Director of Systems Biology Ireland at UCD. He is a world leader in precision medicine. Walter originally trained as a clinician before working in pharma and then in obviously academia and where he is now. He is ranked third in the world in precision medicine, 8th in personalized medicine, and he's among the world's top proteomicists, specializing in systems biology and signal transduction. So welcome, Walter, to the panel. I also would like to welcome Dr. Ashwini Mathur. So Dr. Ashwini is the head of the Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Hub in Novartis in Dublin. He has over 25 years experience in the area of clinical research, with over 20 of them internationally in the pharma industry. His specialities include data science, analytics, statistical design, clinical trials, and clinical data review. So welcome, Ashwini. And last but not least, we have Oonagh O'Shea. So Oonagh is the Managing Director at Accenture Applied Intelligence and has worked in Accenture for over 9 years, mainly specializing in the life sciences and analytics. Oonagh has extensive experience delivering major analytics programs across pharma, mainly in the manufacturing, quality and supply chain space, and also in the life sciences. So welcome to the panel today, and I'm going to kick off the questions. First question, I'm going to direct this please at Walter, and maybe then the rest of the panel can also answer this question. So I suppose just to open, what are the areas and disciplines in clinical research where AI will have the most impact? So a huge question, but maybe we'll just have everybody have a quick answer to that.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here on this panel. I mean, you actually have seen some brilliant examples which almost answered the question for me in the previous talks here. But obviously, imaging is a great area. You know, it's not only the eye scans, but it's also radiology and histopathology, where we already see an impact of AI and where we can clearly see how this accelerates diagnostics. But another area which is up and coming are all the omic disciplines. So genomics is obviously already in the clinic, but there is metabolomics, proteomics is going to be following that. And we need better means to integrate this data, and the obvious way is AI. But also for making very complex relationships like multigenetic diseases or linking microbiome with genetic information and so forth. These are all huge areas where we still have to do a lot of research, but where you can see the path to the clinic and where you can see the utility of the clinic. And I also would like to echo what Peter said before. We shouldn't underrate diagnostics. You know, diagnostics is actually key for administering the right treatments. So I think that these are just a few areas where I can see a huge impact, but I don't want to ramble on, but leave also some to the other speakers.
Great. So Ashwini, maybe you'd like to continue.
Yeah, I think a lot of areas have been covered by Professor Kolch and the other speakers where it can be used. One of the areas that was mentioned, I think Peter mentioned, the patient journey. I think all of us would love to see, based on my journey as a patient, as a person who's been visiting clinics and all the medicines that I've taken over my whole life. I've been alive for 55 years. Can, based on this data, someone predict what's going to happen next? I think it's an extremely complex problem to model it in a systematic way, in the traditional way, in a statistical modeling. It's a very difficult problem. But using AI, I think it can be done. Now, obviously, you need to define the problem very, very well. But I think it's an area which needs, can be very, very beneficial. As soon as you enter a hospital, if somebody can tell you this is where you are, even better if I can at home know what's going to happen next to me based on what I've done and what has happened to me in the past, I think it'll be great.
Fantastic, Walter and Ashwini. It kind of echoes what Peter Keeling said earlier. Citizens of the world need to take charge of their diagnostic health. Oonagh, would you like to add anything to where AI will have the most impact in healthcare?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what everybody is saying, right? We are moving to personalized treatments and interventions, and you know, for years, patients were diagnosed with the disease. They often received the same treatment. For some it worked, for some it didn't work, or it marginally worked, or it had serious side effects. And we have so much more ability to be precise now with the advances in data, in genomics and diagnostics. And you know, it's AI that is driving how we predict a therapy's efficacy and safety. I think in addition to the positive impact, obviously, though, here, it also creates further challenges that AI can also solve, right? So the industry is going through a huge amount of change with this. And in other areas, such as, you know, the shift to biologics, the accelerated product approvals that we're seeing coming through, all really, really positive for the patient, but not without its challenges, right? When you have a life sciences industry trying to keep pace. And I think AI has a natural role to play there as well, and ultimately just better serve patients.
Thanks, Oonagh. So maybe further along those lines, another question to you related to what you just said. How would AI be helping you in the discovery of new drugs, for example?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally there's a large amount of manual analysis, right, to identify new drugs, and hugely time consuming. But we are seeing machine learning and deep learning now playing a key role in speeding it up. We're seeing companies investing heavily. You know, we see news articles popping up all of the time about big players partnering with the boutique AI firms and the AI-driven biotech firms to drive the advances. And if you look at it just surely from an efficiency perspective, right, AI is helping manage the scale and complexity of the data. There's some really interesting stuff going on. We're seeing, you know, image analytics, for example, characterizing features of cell lines and understanding disease mechanisms. We're seeing text analytics in the pharmacovigilance space, so being used to help earlier identify adverse effects and adverse events. AI assessing the full range of compounds, right, to discover the new drug, and that's really interesting. And indeed, you know, repurposing drugs as well. So we saw the industry actually reach a huge milestone earlier this year. The first truly AI discovered drug entered human clinical trials earlier this year. It's for the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder. And I think we're just going to see more and more developments like this. Yeah, I for one, I'm keeping a keen eye on it.
Great. So actually, Walter, a question for you, and I suppose you know, all our speakers, and Oonagh touched on it just now, but all our speakers earlier on did as well. I mean, how will AI become embedded in clinical practice, or is it already embedded?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and Pearse touched on it very elegantly. There's a long way from an algorithm to actually application, and there's numerous obstacles, and a lot of really good methods have failed because they simply don't fit into the clinical routine. I think in AI, one big obstacle is, of course, that the system is not prepared for it. You know, we never had such a technology at hand. And also the skills are not there. The medical curriculum doesn't include any training in terms of AI or serious data analytics. So another aspect is that in large parts, AI is still this black box, which gives you nice results, but we have no idea how these nice results are generated. And this is very unsatisfactory from a clinical point of view, where you really want to be able to track every decision and how it was made. And that's not only important from a regulatory point of view, but as human beings, we simply have often difficulties believing in something, and that truly means believing, you know, what we don't understand. And so there's also this sort of psychological barrier. Can we really trust it? The way to get it into the clinic is obviously a long one, but I personally believe that I think we need pilot projects like, you know, we've seen with the eye scans, where you really can demonstrate the power of AI, where you can develop the frameworks alongside, where you can deal with the ethical problems, because obviously if you can tell from an eye scan what other diseases somebody has, like high blood pressure, smoking, diabetes, that has huge ethical implications. So all these things need to be developed as we go along. And I think it needs those pilot projects where we can learn how to do it, and then it can be rolled out on a wider basis. but of course we would like to see more of those pilot projects.
Thanks, Walter. And actually, you raised a very interesting point that it's not, clinicians would not be exposed to any of this during their medical training. But I believe you've started an MSc program. Is that correct?
Yes, we actually started an MSc program which starts this year, and that's MSc for Artificial Intelligence in Medical Research and for Medical Applications. And this is one drop in the ocean where we try to remedy the situation. It's primarily targeted computer scientists, but at the moment, but eventually we also want to broaden it and roll it out for biologists and medical students.
Great. So I'm going to bring that another question along these lines to Ashwini. Ashwini, embedding, so we've talked about embedding it in clinical practice with Walter, but how about embedding AI and machine learning practices in a company?
Yeah, I think it's a tricky situation, and it's tricky because I think it's a strange one. We, in a company, we should be adapting anything which helps us move the business along efficiently, and I think AI and machine learning algorithms do bring that in, but it is not easy to get it embedded. Our CEO very clearly has said out in the public that Novartis wants to be known as a data science company, as a machine learning company, as an AI company. Now, that is very, very different from being a company with AI ML people. Yeah. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of us make, that is it a data science company or a company with data scientists? And Novartis has always been a company with data scientists. We always were working with data. Regulators always require data and analytics on it. So what is so different? What is our CEO saying that become a data science company? So obviously it's about a culture, it's about a mindset change. And one of the key things as a gap that I see is that the senior leadership does not talk that talk, So they are very, very comfortable talking, complex. So they will talk OCT imaging. They will talk about all technical terms related to eye diseases. They'll talk about all diseases related to any, in technical terms, in medical terms, even the non-medics. But they will not talk technical with respect to data, because this myth exists that data is kind of math. Math has a taboo attached to it. It's difficult. The math is not for everyone. It's for people who are good with numbers. But we are very, very good in, saying that, if you don't talk about MRIs, you cannot work in a pharmaceutical company. But nobody says, if you're not good with data science, don't work in a pharmaceutical company. Why don't we say that? Why isn't our senior leadership talking that data science talk? And it is true with everyone. So it's still looked at as a funny thing. Now everyone, so it's still looked at skeptically, that now everyone talks about data scientists. There are memes floating around, oh, you also want to be a data scientist. So there is a little bit of work that all of us as data scientists have to do. We have to turn this around. It's a cultural change. And to walk away from, what Professor Kolch said, that, this whole myth about that it's a black box and things like that. There are many black boxes. I think for me as a data scientist, the MRI scan that comes out after the MRI machine, I think it's a black box. By magic, I can see a scan of my brain. I think it's a black box. Why isn't that same black box philosophy allowed with data science? Okay, you don't understand everything, but here's something, look at the results. Does it make sense? So I think it's a cultural journey. And are we there? No. Will it take time? Yes. Can we help? Of course we can. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes complete sense, and actually aligns with maybe the vision that both all our speakers, Paulina and Pearse and also Peter, said earlier about the democratization of AI and becoming almost like a language for everybody to speak. So I'm just looking at the time, so we've probably about 5 minutes left. So I'm just going to ask about 5 more questions in those 5 minutes, just letting the panelists know. So Oonagh, a question for you. How do we bring new drugs to the patients?
How are we bringing them?
AI.
Yeah.
So obviously from AI, so you mentioned the first drug came out,
Yeah.
FDA approval, but how will we push for more?
I think it's a really relevant question, actually, even for the world we find ourselves in today. And if I can take today's example, right, with the large number of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments that are coming through the pipeline, some of these, you know, hopefully will progress and get approved. But then where are we, right? Do we have the capacity to manufacture? How do we manage supply? And for example, if more than one emerges over time, or if we see safety concerns like what we saw with the Oxford trials, for example, do we then run into excess capacity? So the industry is really being challenged to, I suppose, ramp up manufacturing to respond. And AI has a role to play in managing that in terms of controlling variability to ensure that robust final product. But then to balance supply and demand. And to do that, we really need to be equipped with near real-time data and simulation capability. And that has to be across functions and in collaboration with, you know, suppliers, wholesalers, distributors, back to the contract manufacturers, and to have that true end-to-end visibility that we haven't really had in the industry before, to enable the scenario planning. And again, it's all driven through data and through AI.
Okay, and Walter, data. Where are we going to get the data to train these AI models?
Yeah, that's a huge challenge, and data are absolutely critical and very, very important. In proteomics, we have this saying, garbage in, garbage out, and pretty much the same applies to AI algorithms. If the data are not good, the results will not be good. There is a number of, you know, initiatives, big and small, around the globe, which are garnering and gathering this data. So for instance, the Human Genome Atlas, the 1 million genomes in the EU. We in Ireland here started an initiative funded by charities, industry and Science Foundation Ireland, which is called Precision Oncology Ireland, and headed by myself and Liam Gallagher, where we, on a much, much smaller scale, try to marry research with clinical data and use computational modeling, including AI, to basically manufacture something what we call digital twins, which would be a virtual patient where we can simulate diagnostics, try out treatments in silico before we actually give it to the patient. And all these efforts, you know, can contribute to actually getting the amount of data. And also, as we've seen in the talks, there's many different types of data which can be used for AI applications. We are mainly using molecular data, but one can also use insurance records, health records. And I think a big change and jump will occur if we ever manage to get e-health records straightened out and implemented and interchangeable. I think that would push the field, you know, a quantum leap forward.
Great. And Ashwini, we can't have a conversation about the future of AI in healthcare without talking about ethics. So I'm wondering, maybe have you any thoughts around that?
Ethics, yeah.
It's a huge area, but
ethics and governance. And for me, in my simplistic thinking, maybe it is you know, not that difficult, but just my personal opinion, is AI and ethics. So the question is that if based on AI you get a diagnosis wrong, who is responsible? At that moment, do you have the freedom to say to the patient who got diagnosed wrong that, look, the AI model predicted it, you know, what can I do? And can you, in your own mind, say, it's a black box, I don't understand what is happening? Yeah. Now the question, I don't think so it's like that. The question is, AI is going to help each one of us take a clinical decision, which is going to benefit the patient. The responsibility, the accountability still stays with the human being. Yeah. So just like, you know, you used an X-ray. So in 1950s, you could have easily said that, you know, should I trust the X-ray, or is it my understanding of the X-ray which is going to define the diagnosis? And how is the X-ray any different from AI? So my question is that AI is today's X-ray. Yeah. So in that view, AI, the ethics is pretty straightforward. All the responsibility and accountability is yours. Do not even think about blaming it on the black box and the data. So very, very simplistic, and sorry for being this simplistic. But.
No, in fact, I think that's leads me on perfectly to the last question for the panel, and please all feel free to answer. But you know, we've talked today a lot about all the issues that we need to overcome and the biggest challenges. But I don't know, maybe just your final thoughts on the biggest challenges around AI and implementing AI in healthcare and just completely shifting the paradigm. So I suppose we'll kick off Walter. Maybe any thoughts in like 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think the clinical implementation is really, in my view, the biggest challenge. And another related challenge is actually keeping up with the pace. AI is developing incredibly fast. There's new methods coming out every day. And for a clinical application, of course, you want something what is standardized, what is very reliable, and we sort of need to funnel this cornucopia of development into something what is fitting and fit for a clinical routine workflow. And I think that's a big challenge.
Super, thanks, Walter. Oonagh, I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, I think it's people. So, you know, people, for example, they want the benefit of personalized experiences, but they're skeptical of maybe the methods in terms of how it's delivered. So I think we'll see them owning the experience, and you know, we'll equip patients to manage their treatments and their health. I think on the people aspect as well, it's about workforce actually. Up to now, AI has been about automation of more simple tasks. It's now how humans and machines are going to collaborate. So I think we'll see, you know, more and more advances in NLP and computer vision to enable that collaboration, and robots as well, right? Typically, we've seen them in clinical settings, we've seen them in factories, but they're typically tethered to a fixed place, or they're in contained spaces, and we're going to see them more out in the open world with, you know, less visible physical boundaries. So it's that blended workforce, and look, AI powers all of that, so it's an amazing space to be in, I think, right now.
Thanks, Oonagh. And Ashwini?
Quickly, you know, I think one thing is we have heard the word skepticism a couple of times. As a scientist, I was always taught to be skeptical because we have to ask questions. That's what scientists do. But we were always told to move things along. So I think if we can balance the skepticism with moving things along, I think we'll be good. And the second part is that the realization that data is available for everyone. You know, so the data sources are there for everyone. Algorithms have become proprietary. Yeah. The AI algorithms have become proprietary, completely in contrast to the situation 20 years ago, where the data was private, algorithms were public, because you would do, you know, I'll do logistic regression. Everyone knew in the world how to do it. Today, the data is democratized, algorithms is proprietary, and if we don't move along, I think we'll fall behind.
Super. Thank you so much to all the panel. I saw a big thumbs up from Pearse during your thought there, Ashwini. So thank you, a huge thank you to the panel today, and a huge thank you to the speakers. I'm going to hand over to my co-host Lorcan, who I'm not sure we have time for questions, but maybe one or two, Lorcan, and then you can wrap up. So thank you so much, everybody.
Wow, yes, thank you. I've a lot of questions to choose from here. One for me, I suppose, someone asked the question, Peter Woods asked this question, and I might as well get it in. Do the panelists see AI and HPC speeding up the process of finding a vaccine for COVID-19? Any thoughts on that? Has AI got a role in this?
I would say it will speed up the finding drugs to fight COVID. Vaccines, we know very well how to make them, and there is a long tradition in making vaccines. So I think there would be limited impact in terms of the time it takes. But for drugs, repurposing drugs, finding new targets, I think this is a very wide field for AI, where AI will make breakthroughs.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Anyone else on this?
Yeah, the reason why we have so many programs ongoing for COVID, you know, the quick path of going from into the clinic, a lot of it has been based on data sciences and based on, you know, drug repurposing. That's the reason why we have so many programs. The day, you know, December, COVID was found, and within 6, 7, 8 months, how come, you know, there are 700 clinical trials going on? Where did these drugs come from? It's not by magic. So somebody looked at the data, decided that there's a good chance for these things to work, and you know, got through ethics, got, you know, patient. So there is a lot of things that are ongoing, which are based on data science, and there's a big role to play.
Excellent. I'm hoping I'll get away to Spain at some stage next year. That's what I'm being very selfish in my questions. Guys, listen, we're really out of time. I'd like to say a really sincere thank you to Peter, to Paulina, to Pearse, to Oonagh, to Ashwini, to Walter, and to especially to my glamorous co-host, Patricia. Super session, guys, this morning. Just to answer questions that a couple of people have asked, the recording of this will be available on the Analytics Institute website from tomorrow. So if you missed part of the session is there. And please encourage your colleagues and friends to have a look at the session. It's obviously very valuable, and I think we all learned a lot about the really exciting work that's going on in the area this morning. And somebody asked about slides. Any of the presenters who are prepared to be able to or allowed to share their slides, if they could send them on to us, we would love to be able to have them up on the, thanks Pearse, thanks Paulina. We'll have them up on the Analytics Institute website, and I'm sure similarly on the Institute for Discovery website. Patricia, thank you very much. I think this worked. We'll definitely have to do some more collaborative work again with you. It was fantastic this morning and appreciated. Thanks everybody, and see you again soon. Cheers.
Thank you.